Hello, I'm Neil Dealey, co-founder and partner of Architects and Urban Planners Metropolitan Workshop. Welcome to Reshaped, a podcast series to mark our 15th year and to record perspectives on how the built environment is changing and needs to change in this historic moment. We asked leading thinkers and doers to respond to issues highlighted by the pandemic while we're in the throes of change, and memories and perspectives are fresh. Has the door opened to a new era? We think so. The 15-minute neighbourhood is an idea that has captured imaginations following its adoption in Paris. It's a simple, seductive idea, and its potential benefits have been highlighted by successive lockdowns everywhere. But to secure its benefits requires fundamental changes to the way we plan so that we can regain better quality of life. A quality of life that's been disrupted by a century of car dominance. This episode offers a critique of the 15-minute neighbourhood. It spells out what we need to do to seize the opportunity hidden within the consequences of the coronavirus pandemic. Paul Chatteron is Professor of Urban Futures at the University of Leeds School of Geography.
The central idea behind the 15-minute neighbourhood concept is really to relocalise urban life, but in a way that tackles a number of persistent problems, and that's about how we move around the city, what local goods and services we've got at our disposal, the levels of pollution, how safe we feel, and the amount and quality of our relationships. So all these can be brought together in this really enticing idea of creating 15-minute neighbourhoods. In essence, what it is can you reach all the goods and services you need to underpin a flourishing life within a 15-minute walk, or that would be even a short cycle? So the 15-minute neighbourhood is starting to grow around the world. I mean, it's a very, very old idea, right? Because you can imagine that this is like older traditional village or town life before the great age of the motor car, where people access local goods and services. That could be shops, hospitals, education, schools, the marketplace, well before the age of the mass motor car. But what's really taken off, especially during the COVID lockdown, is a number of cities around the world, especially led by Paris and some of the big metropolitan areas in Europe, like London and Milan, who are trying to experiment with, how do we make sense of really big cities of around 10 million people, what we call megacities? How do we break them down into smaller, understandable neighbourhoods where people can live good quality lives and access all the things they need to have that good quality life? So Paris has been a really pioneering example, and this idea of a 15-minute neighbourhood really came from Paris. London's really experimenting, and I think it's catching on like wildfire across cities in Europe and North America, where they really want to regain some high quality of life and really good local quality goods and services. The 15-minute neighbourhood is about walking and cycling more, but it's much more than just providing the infrastructure to do that. This is about regenerating local high streets, for example, where there's really good local shops where people can buy affordable fresh produce. This is about creating safe routes to schools. This is about creating more devolved social services like adult and social and children's care in communities. So this is really about a whole different approach to planning. This is about what I call kind of net zero, socially just placemaking. So the 15-minute neighbourhood asks us to live really differently in our cities, because what the modern motor car has done, it's flung us far and wide. It's allowed us to travel really far across cities to access all the things that give us a good quality of life. Now, the 15-minute neighbourhood asks us all to bring those together and shrink them and bring them back to where they actually have always been and should be, and that's within a 15-minute walk of where we live. So there are a huge amount of blocks and barriers to making this a reality. While the idea is catching on like wildfire, the reality is much slower. And I think this is because there's a lock-in, understandable lock-in to how we already live our lives. All the incentives, the subsidies, and the things that we invest as households already take us well beyond what we call a 15-minute city. So the real barrier and block is to really shift the planning process and to get planners and landowners on board with trying to understand that the things that underpin our lives need to be much more local to where people live. So there's loads of built-in benefits to the idea of the 15-minute neighbourhood. One of the key things is to reduce air pollution, because obviously we'll be driving around less. And I think one of the big hidden killers in our cities, especially in the majority world, the big global south cities, is high levels of air pollution, well beyond World Health Organization limits, especially nitrogen and PM 2.5, real nasty killers there. And certainly moves towards the electrification of cars will tackle that. But what we need is much less car use, and that will also bring co-benefits, what we call co-benefits, multiple benefits, in terms of reducing carbon emissions. We know that 30 or 40% of carbon emissions are tied up in car transport, vehicle transport, and we need to reduce those if we're going to have any chance of meeting Paris targets. And obviously, as a geographer, one of the key things for me is, what does this mean for what the future city looks like? Now, one of the key things we have to avoid is this being an agenda for a new form of gentrification. Because many people out there might think, well, I live in something like a 15-minute neighbourhood anyway. I can stroll to my local high street. I've got independent shops. It's really great, yeah? And the thing is, we need to generalise that condition, because if we don't, this just becomes a recipe for a new form of gentrification, establishing and reinforcing existing patterns of inequality rather than tackling inequality and really bringing the city together in a new way. So rather than just creating 15-minute neighbourhoods, one of the key things that I want us to focus on is the connections between the 15-minute neighbourhoods and how we weave this together in a beautiful new fabric of the city. Because what divides the 15-minute neighbourhoods are major arterial routes and often dead zones with poor activity. So we need to have a whole city approach rather than a single neighbourhood approach. I think what we've seen with the COVID pandemic and the associated lockdowns is that it has supercharged this agenda, right? This idea. And what we've all realised during lockdown is the quality of our local green spaces and services and goods in our high streets, and especially opportunities for meeting our neighbours and local employment, have become really pronounced. So what we're seeing during coronavirus is this new appetite for local life. So I think we're going to see a shift anyway to smaller cities and towns away from the big cities, and an appetite to relocalise life. And I think this will mean significant changes for big city centres, right? Where people might be less inclined to go, might be doing online retail and home working and visiting local goods and services. So this is an opportunity to really embed some of the things that many sustainable development advocates have been pushing for a long time, which is reduced car use, more active travel, less road pollution, more social interaction, better local economies, that kind of thing. So we need to use this COVID pandemic as an opportunity, in spite of its terrible consequences, and use a 15-minute neighbourhood to bolster ideas like a new Green Deal, green recovery, and certainly the Build Back Better movement, where we can start to plan our neighbourhoods in a very different way as we start to rebuild society after this terrible succession of lockdowns.
That was Paul Chatteron. The car has flung us far and wide, he argues, and we need to shift the planning process to get people on board with the benefits of the 15-minute neighbourhood. But the danger is that if we don't think about it on a city or nationwide basis, it could boil down to what he calls an agenda for gentrification that reinforces existing inequalities. There is a generational opportunity to embed truly sustainable development principles. We must use the idea of the 15-minute neighbourhood to bolster and develop those principles, not just in the way we plan neighbourhoods, but in the way we plan cities. You can listen to other podcasts in the Reshape series at all the major providers, or go to our website, metwork.co.uk. Series directed by Lee Mallet, produced by David Michon and Justina Green. recorded and edited by Sean Crook.